In this video, we'll explore back into the distant past of the American Southwest to unlock the secrets of organic pottery paint. Potters in the prehistoric Southwest had many different paint recipes. So if you go from culture to culture or different areas, you'll find they had different ways of making their paint. For example, 4-mile polychrome was usually made with a lead-based glaze paint. Archaeologists have been able to study the paint and determine what percentage of manganese to lead, copper, whatever the ingredients are. But Tucson polychrome, as this one is, was also manganese-based black, but was not lead like the White Mountain Redwares. If you're looking at Mimbres style pottery, the black paint on this is actually red iron oxide that is reduced to turn black. And usually you can tell that because there's often little areas where it's blushed. Here there's a little blushed area right here where it's just slightly reddish, where it didn't reduce properly. Salado polychrome is different. It uses organic paint. That means that the paint is actually made from boiled down plant material. So it's an entirely different sort of technology than we find on these mineral-based paints we have on these. Organic paint is interesting. I've been working on trying to get organic paint right for many years, and I get a lot of questions from students or people that view my channel and say, I'm trying to use organic paint, why is it not working for me? So I think there's a lot of confusion in not understanding just how complicated or how difficult it is to achieve. Once you got it figured out, it's really not that difficult, and that's why Salado polychrome swept across the southern Southwest in the 1300s. If we look at prehistoric sherds, we see that it's easy to tell the difference between a mineral paint and an organic paint. For example, on this sherd, this has a mineral black, and if you look at it under a magnifying glass or up really close with the right lighting conditions, you can see that raised surface where the paint is. Whereas this one is Salado polychrome, and if you look at it, you can see that the paint is not raised at all. In fact, you can see the same scratches or strokes in the slip will run all the way through the paint, showing that the paint is recessed. It's sunk down into the slipped surface. You'll also see, if you look at some of these with organic paint, that the edge is a little bit fuzzy. It's not quite as crisp as mineral paint. So I have a few good examples here of organic-based paint on prehistoric sherds that we can use as a reference as we try to recreate it. So let's go back and I'll talk to you about the history of organic paint pottery, kind of how it came about, and how it came about that people down here in the southern Southwest, near Tucson, where I'm living, came to be making this organic paint pottery. And then we'll talk about the materials required to make it, how we process those materials, and how we go about making organic paint pottery today. Anasazi potters in the Four Corners area developed organic paint pottery way back, possibly as early as 500 AD, back when decorated pottery was just getting started in the Southwest. They used a white smectite clay slip with organic paint made from Rocky Mountain bee plant and fired in underground trench kilns that were smothered with earth. This limited the amount of oxygen available to the pottery, keeping the black paint black and the white areas stark white. About 1030, the Mogollon potters on the Puerco River developed oxidized organic paint pottery. In this case, it was probably fired on the surface of the ground instead of trench kilns, and the smectite clay slip they were using fired red as opposed to white. This was something new. This was made for several hundred years up in the Puerco River Valley and never spread far beyond there, until about 1275, when in the White Mountains near the Mogollon Rim, potters began to produce Pinto black on red and Pinto polychrome. Pinto black on red uses the same technology as the Puerco Valley Redwares, that is, the organic paint is painted on a red firing slip. Pinto polychrome, on the other hand, used a white clay slip in the place of the red. This was different from Puerco Valley Redwares in that the designs were different, but also because it was for the first time being made outside of the Puerco River Valley along the Mogollon Rim. In the decades that followed, in the early 1300s, this pottery type spread south into the Tonto Basin and then along the Salt and Gila River valleys towards Phoenix and east towards Safford and into New Mexico. This was called Salado polychrome or Roosevelt redware. Salado polychromes, like Puerco Valley redwares, were probably fired on the surface of the ground to achieve full oxidation. And that special white smectite clay slip that they were using was probably being traded in from the Little Colorado River Valley far to the north. Whatever the case, Salado polychrome was dependent on trade with the north to produce oxidized organic paint pottery. It was made right up until about 1450, when this whole area was depopulated and the people no longer had access to those smectite clay slips coming from the north. Here's some examples of organic paint that I have from various sources. This is mesquite beans, boiled down mesquite beans, whole beans thrown in the pot. This is yucca fruit. Just chop up the yucca fruits, throw them in the pot. And this is some made from Rocky Mountain bee plant that my friend Wayne Keene sent me. And this is traditional in the Pueblos to wrap it up in a corn husk to store it. Again, the whole plant chopped up, thrown in a pot, boiled down. From my experiments, the organic paint is important, but not really the critical element, because I can make this out of a lot of different things. It's fairly easy to make. The critical ingredient, in my opinion, is the slip, the smectite clay slip that it's applied to, and the firing to a lesser degree. Here's the slip I've been using. This is the white clay in its raw form, the way I dig it out of the ground up in northern Arizona, not far from St. John's. Crumbly white material. I take that and I levigate it. Levigation is just simply letting it settle in water so that the larger particles settle to the bottom of the bucket and then pouring off the slip in a suspension. And this is the levigated, purified slip. This is what I'm using to apply to the pot. Purifying it, however, even increases the shrinkage rate, which this stuff has a high shrinkage rate to start with. So you need to be careful once you've purified it that you apply it to the pot very, very thin. When I'm painting on my white smectite slip, I like to have it fairly thick, almost the consistency of like yogurt. And then just paint on a thin coat. I've tried mopping it on, but I haven't had as good a luck with that as painting it. You can see here that the finished pot is still, you can still see the brown shining through all over. But as that dries, you'll see less of that, and after firing even less. So here's one that has already been completely slipped and dried, and you can see that it's not so see-through-ish anymore. Although if you look, you can still see spots where the brown's shining through. And then once it's painted and fired, once again, if you look close, you know, you can see the brown through, but when you look at the whole pot, you don't notice those spots. So the slip has to be kept fairly thin, and that's because it's a smectite slip, so it has a high shrinkage rate. It's important to have your organic paint at the right consistency so it doesn't want to run. It also helps if your pot is bone dry so the clay can absorb some of that moisture. All right, let's recap organic paint pottery technology. The first ingredient you're going to need is some good smectite clay slip. This is the key ingredient that you're going to need first. Then you're going to need some organic paint. You can make this out of all kinds of different plants. Traditional in the Southwest is Rocky Mountain bee plant, but if you're not living in the Western United States, you might experiment with some plants in your area because I've found a lot of things will work. Then you're going to apply it in a thin coat to a still damp pot. Once it's bone dry, you're going to paint your organic paint onto that pot in whatever design you want. Then you're going to fire that pot in a brief outdoor fire, no hotter than 800 degrees Celsius, and not too long. If you burn it either too hot or too long, you can burn out your paint and get left with these gray images like this. If you do it right, you'll be left with some good pottery. Now, if you have questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll answer them. If you're enjoying my channel, hit that subscribe button. That way you'll know when my next video comes out. If you'd like to learn more about pottery paint, specifically the mineral paints that I use for these pots over here, check out this video, which goes more in depth on how I make mineral pottery paint. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.